Rain fell in sheets against the city's dim streets, neon lights bleeding into puddles like watercolor. The world moved fast outside, the blur of taxis, umbrellas darting through crosswalks. But inside his apartment, Daniel Hayes sat still. A lamp cast pale light over stacks of unopened mail, empty takeout cartons, and the photograph he never put away. His wife's smile looked back at him, frozen in a frame that felt more like a wound than a memory. He adjusted his raincoat hanging by the door, though he had nowhere to go. For 3 years since the accident, Daniel's nights had been the same silence, grief, and the ache of promises broken. He pressed a hand over his eyes, but no sleep came. Outside, thunder cracked. He hadn't noticed the sound of hurried footsteps until a faint scream tore through the storm. Daniel Hayes, once a paramedic, now lived as a ghost of his former self. Each morning began with black coffee and silence. The rhythm of sirens, once his calling, now haunted him. He had left the service after the crash that claimed his wife, Clara. She had been driving to meet him after a late shift. When the drunk driver swerved, Daniel had arrived at the hospital too late, carrying her ring in his pocket ever since. Work was quiet now. He ran a small repair shop on the edge of town, fixing radios, watches, and clocks, machines easier than hearts. His neighbors rarely saw him, except when he slipped out for groceries or walked past the river, where he and Clara once dreamed of raising a family. Still, a faint trace of humanity remained in his rituals, feeding the stray cat that lingered by his shop, writing letters to Clara he never mailed, and walking home beneath the same raincoat she had bought him years ago. But beneath every routine lay a hollow truth. Daniel had stopped living. Nights blurred into mornings. Friends had drifted away. His world was static until the storm that night, when the scream pierced through his window like a blade, forcing him to move. The scream was faint at first, carried by the storm, but unmistakably human. Daniel's pulse surged, instincts from years as a medic snapping awake. He grabbed his raincoat, shoved his feet into old boots, and bolted down the stairwell. On the corner, under the glow of a flickering streetlight, a young woman struggled to stand. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her knees scraped, and her arms wrapped around a trembling boy of maybe 7. A man had tried to snatch her purse, she explained breathlessly later. But what Daniel saw in that moment wasn't her fear. It was the child's. The boy's wide eyes darted between his mother and the rain, his lips quivering. Daniel dropped to his knees in front of him. "You're safe now," he said, voice steady despite the storm thrashing around them. The boy clung to him like he was an anchor. The woman staggered, nearly collapsing. Daniel caught her before she hit the pavement, his coat shielding her from the rain. "Hospital," he muttered, but she shook her head violently. "No, we can't, I'll be fine." Her refusal wasn't pride, it was something deeper, Daniel sensed. Fear of more than just a mugger. Still, she was shivering, the boy was sobbing, and Daniel couldn't walk away. He guided them both to his shop nearby, unlocking the door with trembling hands. Inside, the warm glow of old lamps flickered to life. He fetched a first aid kit, patched her wound with quiet precision, and offered the boy a faded blanket Clara once used on chilly nights. For the first time in years, Daniel's apartment wasn't silent. The sound of a boy's sobs softening, a mother whispering comfort, filled the air. And though he didn't know it yet, that night had broken the seal on his solitude. She came back the next day. Daniel was at his workbench repairing a clock when the bell above the shop door chimed. The same woman stood there, her son gripping her hand tightly. Her hair was brushed neatly now, though bruises lingered on her arm. I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice soft but firm, "for last night. I didn't even ask your name." "Daniel," he replied, awkwardly wiping oil from his hands. "Eva," she said, and gestured to the boy. "This is Sam." Sam gave the faintest nod, his toy car clutched in his hand. Daniel offered him a half smile. "Nice ride." The boy blinked, then shuffled closer, placing the car carefully on Daniel's workbench. Eva exhaled. "We don't have much, but I baked these." She held out a small box of cookies. Daniel hesitated, then accepted them. The visit was brief, but it set a rhythm. Eva and Sam stopped by on rainy afternoons. Sometimes they brought leftover soup, sometimes just a drawing Sam made for Mr. Hayes. Daniel showed him how gears fit inside clocks, how broken things could tick again. Eva watched quietly, a soft gratitude in her eyes. There was no romance yet, just a fragile warmth in shared silences, in Sam's laughter echoing through a shop that hadn't known joy in years. For Daniel, every small kindness felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't long before the town noticed. Eva worked nights as a cleaner in one of the city's corporate towers. Some whispered she was beneath. Daniel, the widower once respected as a medic, now seen as a man who could do better. Others pitied him, claiming he clung to a woman with a child who wasn't his. Daniel overheard it at the market, a repairman and a janitor. Perfect pair. Laughter followed. He didn't care for gossip, but Eva did. One evening, after walking Sam home, she stopped outside his shop. Her voice trembled. "You shouldn't let people think there's something between us. It'll only hurt your name." Daniel stared at her, rain dripping from his coat. "My name stopped mattering when Clara died." Her jaw tightened. But Sam, he deserves better than whispers. It was the first wall between them. He saw the exhaustion etched in her face, the years of being judged for her job, her single motherhood, her survival. Daniel wanted to tell her none of that mattered, but the words tangled in his throat. They parted that night with silence heavier than rain. And for the first time since he'd met Eva, his shop felt empty again. The call came on a stormy night. Sam had collapsed at school. An asthma attack Eva couldn't control. The hospital was miles away, but Daniel didn't think twice. He abandoned his shop, raced through pounding rain, and found Eva in the emergency ward, her hands shaking as doctors worked over her son. Daniel took her hands in his. "He'll be okay," he whispered, though his own chest burned with fear. Memories of Clara's hospital bed flashed, but he held Eva steady when she nearly fell apart. Hours dragged. Finally, a doctor emerged saying Sam was stable, resting. Relief shattered Eva's composure. She wept into Daniel's chest, his arms encircling her with a strength neither had realized he still carried. Later, when Sam stirred awake, it was Daniel at his bedside, holding his small hand, whispering, "You're safe, buddy. Just breathe." Eva watched from the doorway, tears streaking down her cheeks. She saw what Daniel hadn't admitted: he wasn't saving them out of duty. He needed them, just as much as they needed him. And in that quiet hospital room, the weight of years lifted. Weeks later, the town still whispered, but Daniel no longer cared. The repair shop now rang with Sam's laughter, Eva's voice humming as she helped tidy shelves. On Sundays, they walked to the river where Daniel once mourned alone. Now Eva carried a thermos of coffee, Sam skipped stones, and Daniel stood beside them, not as a rescuer but as part of something whole. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Eva slipped her hand into his. No grand declarations, no polished promises, just warmth, steady and real. Daniel looked down at Sam, who was tracing hearts in the sand with a stick. Clara's photograph still sat on his shelf at home, but for the first time it didn't ache. It smiled back at him. Life hadn't given him what he planned, but through kindness, loss had grown into love again. Sometimes broken clocks don't just tick again. They teach you time can begin in you,